Or what if the way we buy things, sell things, even how we give gifts,
Right.
what if that tells us something much, much deeper about human connection, about culture itself? In this deep dive, we're kind of peeling back the layers on economic anthropology. We're looking at how people get resources, use them, share them, but through a really unique cultural lens. So forget the purely financial models for a minute. We're talking about how survival, our relationships, maybe even our basic instincts are all tangled up in every economic act.
Yeah, and what's really fascinating here, I think, is that we get to explore these insights that, well, they seriously challenge our modern ideas about things like scarcity or rational choice or what profit even means. This exploration, it's going to shine a light on how different societies adapt, how they organize work, and how often values and relationships are the real currency. Get ready, because you might just start seeing the economy in a completely new way.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Maybe starting with some of the foundational stuff, like the work of pioneers, Bronislaw Malinowski. He famously studied something called the Kula ring.
Yeah.
This was among the Trobriand Islanders in Papua New Guinea. Is this really complex ceremonial exchange? I mean, picture this. People undertaking these long, pretty dangerous sea voyages just to exchange these ornate shell armbands and necklaces, stuff that had, well, basically zero market value, as we think of it.
Right, zero market value. And that's the crux of it, isn't it? Why risk so much for something that isn't valuable in a monetary sense? It wasn't about piling up personal wealth, not at all. It was entirely about building social ties, cementing alliances. It was about spiritual and social security.
Ah, okay. So it reveals this deep truth then, that for many people, economic acts aren't just about getting stuff. They're like the social glue holding things together.
Exactly. And that leads us perfectly into Marcel Mauss's big idea, the gift. This was groundbreaking stuff. Mauss argued that giving isn't just, one person giving something to another. It's this ongoing obligation, a cycle between whole social groups. You receive, you give back, you receive again.
A cycle.
Yeah. He famously said gifts make friends, and he pointed out that whether it's words, goods, services, even people, historically, these exchanges create and reinforce relationships. So the economy becomes just as much about people and their obligations to each other as it is about the actual stuff.
Which really makes you wonder, doesn't it? Is our modern economy, the one we live in, truly separate from our social lives? Or is it still embedded, maybe in ways we don't always see, in these webs of obligation and reciprocity?
That's the big question. And this deep connection, it goes way back to our roots. Think about economic adaptation, just how societies use whatever's around them, food, timber, land, just to survive.
Right. Like for most of human history, we were hunter-gatherers.
Exactly. And our economic behavior was completely tied to the environment right around us. Our social structures, our rituals, even how big our groups were, all shaped by needing to find and share resources efficiently.
It's a pretty powerful reminder, isn't it?
Yeah.
That how we survive basically defines so much about a society. Okay, so we've seen these deep human connections in early economies, but then anthropology hit this major fork in the road, didn't it? This big debate, formalist versus substantivist. It almost sounds like they were speaking different languages about what an economy even is.
Pretty much. On one side, you had the formalists, people like Harold Schneider, Raymond Firth. They believed that Western economic ideas, scarcity, supply and demand, trying to maximize your own utility or satisfaction.
Getting the most bang for your buck, basically.
Kind of, yeah. They argued these ideas apply everywhere, universally. That every person, no matter the culture, is fundamentally a rational actor, trying to optimize their gains from limited resources. Whether those resources are money or maybe prestige or even love, they saw it all as a kind of calculation. Some even wanted anthropology to be like a predictive science based on this.
That sounds very much like standard economics today, right?
Yeah.
Aiming for that universal rational actor model. But doesn't that feel a bit limited? Where does it fall short if we're trying to understand, say, why someone follows a cultural obligation even if it doesn't seem profitable?
And that's exactly what the substantivists jumped on. People like Karl Polanyi, especially in his big work, The Great Transformation, they basically said, hold on a minute. They argued that in many, maybe most, non-market societies, the economy isn't some separate thing. It's embedded, deeply woven into kinship, into religion, into politics.
Embedded.
Oh, yeah. So people produce things for use, for their own community, not primarily for exchange or profit in a market. And their economic actions are guided by social obligations, by established norms, not just individual choice.
So it's less about me getting the most and more about keeping the community going.
Precisely. They saw our modern market economy as kind of the odd one out, historically speaking, not the default setting for humanity. Now, both views definitely have their critics. Substantivism, well, it can struggle a bit to fully explain our super globalized world where markets and money have reached almost everywhere.
Right.
But formalism gets hit for treating everything like a cold calculation. I mean, how does it explain a parent spending a fortune on their kids' education? Or a soldier risking their life for honor? Those aren't simple utility calculations.
Good point. It seems too simplistic.
It really boils down to this classic anthropological split, emic versus etic. Are you looking from the inside the emic view, using the culture's own terms and meanings, or from the outside the etic view, using universal analytical categories? Understanding both perspectives is probably key. So maybe the question for you listening is, how do you think these two viewpoints might actually complement each other? How can they help us understand today's economies, which are often a mix of market forces and deep social obligations?
That's a great question to chew on. How do these lenses apply today? But okay, whatever viewpoint we take, every economy has some basic activities, right? So let's break down those core building blocks now. How stuff gets produced, how it gets distributed and exchanged, and finally, how it's consumed.
That's good. Let's start with production, basically, how we get the resources we need. Anthropologists generally talk about four main modes of subsistence, four main ways people produce their food and resources, and each one profoundly shapes the society. First up, hunting-gathering. Think of groups like the Juhonzi and the Kalahari, or traditionally Australian Aborigines.
Okay, small groups, mobile.
Exactly.
Right.
Small bands, usually 50 to 100 people, moving around seasonally, simple tools. And critically, they share almost everything. There's very little private property or accumulation,
Which leads to
remarkably egalitarian societies. Very little hierarchy, often animistic beliefs closely tied to nature. Second, pastoralism. This is all about herding domesticated animals, cattle, camels, goats, you name it. Think of the Maasai in East Africa or the Raikas.
herders.
Yep. And this often involves very strict ideas about private property, but in animals, not necessarily land. This can sometimes lead to raiding and warfare over herds.
Right, like the Maasai cattle raiding.
Exactly. But animals are also huge social symbols used for bride price and rituals. They're deeply woven into the culture, even emotionally. Third, we have horticulture. This is simple, small-scale farming. Think digging sticks, axes, baskets, no plows, no irrigation usually, like the Yanomami in South America or Naga tribes.
So gardens rather than huge fields.
Kind of. Land isn't permanently owned. It's often cleared, farmed for a bit, then left to recover, slash and burn, or shifting cultivation. It's often combined with hunting or fishing. And here you often see clear gender roles in labor, like Iroquois women controlled maize cultivation, which gave them significant power, even over warfare, because armies needed food supplies they controlled. Seasonality is also huge here, shaping festivals, social life, everything. And finally, intensive agriculture. This really kicked off around 8,000 years ago. Think plows, irrigation, permanent fields. This allows for huge surpluses.
They're a game changer.
Massive. Think rice farmers in East Asia or the ancient civilizations in the Indus Valley, the Nile Valley. This system supports dense populations, leads to specialized jobs, social classes, states forming.
And often more male dominance.
Yes, that often correlates. There are theories about why maybe the physical strength needed for plowing, maybe women's roles in childcare, keeping them closer to home, or maybe women handling the food processing tasks compatible with being at home.
Wow, that's a really useful framework. It makes you think about your own food, doesn't it? Where do the components on your plate ultimately come from? Which of these modes? But okay, once the stuff is produced, how does it move around? Let's talk distribution and exchange.
Right. In societies without pervasive markets, there are three main ways resources tend to move. Number one, reciprocity. This is basically giving and taking. But the anthropologist Marshall Solins, he broke it down into three helpful types.
Okay.
First, generalized reciprocity. This is giving without expecting an immediate or maybe even any specific return. Think parents giving to children, or that Juhonzi ritual you sometimes hear about.
Insulting the meat.
Exactly. After a big kill, they downplay it, insult it, to prevent anyone from getting arrogant and to reinforce the norm of sharing. It keeps everyone humble and ensures the sharing continues. Second, balanced reciprocity. Here, you do expect something back, something of roughly equal value, though maybe not right away. Wedding gifts are a good modern example. Or those big pig feasts, the mocha in Papua New Guinea. Gifting pigs creates political alliances and obligations. You give a pig, you expect one back later, maybe bigger.
Interesting. even election freebies.
You could argue that.
Hmm.
Parties hand out goods expecting votes in return. It fits the balanced model, in a way. Third, negative reciprocity. This is where you try to get more than you give. Haggling in a market, maybe trickery, sometimes outright theft. Those Maasai cattle raids we mentioned. Classic negative reciprocity, trying to get something for nothing, or at least getting the better end of the deal, often through force or stealth. Then there's a really interesting kind of special form of exchange called silent barter.
Silent barter.
Sure. Yeah. Two groups trade goods, but they never actually meet face to face. Like, the Vadas in Sri Lanka would leave honey in a specific spot, and Sinhale villagers would come later and leave metal tools in return.
Wow. Why would they do that?
Could be language barriers, could be deep-seated antagonism where meeting might lead to conflict, could be big status differences. It's based purely on trust and convention. Can you imagine trying to trade like that on eBay today? And the third main mechanism is redistribution. This is where resources flow into some central point, a chief, a leader, maybe even a temple or government agency, and then get parceled back out to the community.
Like taxes.
Exactly. Modern taxes funding welfare or public services are a huge example of redistribution. But the classic anthropological example is the potlatch ceremonies of indigenous groups on the northwest coast of North America.
Right, I've heard of those. Weren't they about giving away massive amounts of stuff?
Absolutely. Chiefs would accumulate vast quantities of blankets, food, copper plates, all sorts of goods, and then host these huge feasts where they'd give it all away, sometimes even destroy wealth, just to show their power and generosity, boost their prestige, and lock in alliances. It also acted as a leveling mechanism, redistributing wealth from richer groups to poorer ones.
Even a family joint account, maybe managed by one person, could be seen as a mini redistribution system.
Yeah, potentially. It fits the pattern. Pooling resources centrally and then allocating them based on need or status within the group.
Okay, so reciprocity, silent barter, redistribution. These are always stuff moves around that aren't quite like our typical shopping mall experience. So how do these traditional systems compare to what we generally call the market?
Well, market exchange, as economists define it, is pretty distinct. It generally requires a few key things. Money as a universal medium of exchange, prices set by supply and demand, recognize private property rights, and ideally, the absence of coercion in the transaction.
Money is key then.
Money is huge. It solves that double coincidence of wants problem. You don't need to find someone who has exactly what you want and wants exactly what you have. Money stores value, makes trade efficient. And often, historically, it was colonial powers imposing monetization, like fur traders paying indigenous groups in Canada with cash instead of trading goods directly, that pushed societies from reciprocity or redistribution towards market systems.
Well, that changes things.
Fundamentally, money can become a status symbol itself, a fancy car or watch. The focus often shifts from maintaining social ties through exchange to maximizing individual gain or utility. And finally, we have to touch on consumption. It's not just about getting goods. Culture dictates so much about how we consume, who eats first, what foods are forbidden or taboo.
Which brings us to that really interesting contrast you mentioned earlier, minimalist versus consumerist societies. Marshall Solins again, right?
Yeah.
Calling hunter-gatherers the original affluent society.
Exactly. Not affluent because they had tons of stuff, but because they had few finite wants and generally the means to meet them easily. They didn't desire much more than they needed. They were content.
Whereas consumerist societies,
We have seemingly endless demands, endless wants, and therefore a constant feeling of scarcity even amidst abundance. And this, Solins argued, drives competition and the class divisions we see. And social factors deeply shape consumption patterns, sometimes tragically. Remember the Kuru brain disease in Papua New Guinea?
vaguely, it affected women more.
Yes, largely because of consumption patterns.
Right.
Men typically got the best cuts of meat, including animal muscle. Women and children often ate the lesser parts, including the brains of deceased relatives and cannibalistic funeral rites, which transmitted the prion disease.
Wow.
Or think about joint families in India. Often, women eat last, get the leftovers. This is a documented factor contributing to higher rates of malnutrition among women.
And kids learn these patterns early.
Absolutely. Elizabeth Chin did this fascinating study with black school children in Connecticut. Gave them some money. The boys mostly spent it on things for themselves, school supplies, snacks. The girls, they often split the money, buying some things for themselves, but also things for their families, like gifts. They'd already absorbed the household priorities and their role within it. Consumption is deeply social.
Okay, let's pivot now and bring all these fascinating anthropological ideas right into the modern world. What happens when these traditional often embedded economies collide with the massive forces of globalization?
Well, historically, many indigenous economies were pretty isolated, relatively speaking. People lived directly off the land, used fairly simple technologies, maybe traded via barter with neighbors. They were optimizing resources for community well-being, not really chasing individual profit. Often, there wasn't even a strong concept of scarcity or money as we understand it. Sharing was paramount. Social ties, rituals, they were completely intertwined with economic life.
But then along comes globalization. We're talking
Yeah.
colonizers, big mining companies, powerful state governments.
Right. And it often turned out that these indigenous lands were sitting on incredibly valuable resources: timber, minerals, oil, fertile soil,
Suddenly, money becomes the only game in town.
pretty much. Money mattered everywhere. Scarcity, maybe a foreign concept before, suddenly became very real, and people were forced, often brutally, to compete in market systems they never chose and didn't necessarily benefit from. And the results? Well, they can be absolutely devastating.
Huh.
Just look at Congo's Ituri rainforest. Pygmy populations forced into mining coltan, the mineral needed for our phones and laptops.
That's 10, right.
Trapped in inescapable debt cycles with huge interest rates, women abducted by militias. This led to explosions in prostitution, AIDS, other diseases, all driven by global demand for electronics.
That's horrific.
Or in Brazil, the Kayapo people, initially given things like steel tools, salt, sugar for free by outsiders, once they got used to them, reliant on them.
And then they had to pay.
Exactly, but they had no cash. So they were pushed into wage labor, often signing away rights to their land, losing traditional skills in the process. It's a pattern seen again and again. The Yanomami, facing gold, rushes their forests, destroyed by bulldozers, rivers poisoned with mercury from mining, fish dying off, their populations plummeting.
Yeah, in Banaba Island.
In Kiribati, yeah. The entire island basically strip mined for phosphate fertilizer, leading to starvation, forced relocation, just gone. And think about the Andaman Islands. British colonialism, the brutal Kalapani penal colony, led to the Aberdeen Massacre, nearly wiping out the great Andamanese tribes. Those who survived later succumbed to diseases brought by outsiders.
It's a grim pattern. Brian Fagan sums it up as potentially leading to massacre and ethnocide, breakdown of community, forced labor, social collapse, disease, displacement. It paints a really bleak, often tragic picture of these encounters. But
Fair.
is it always negative? Is there any way globalization can actually be a force for good, or at least offer some benefits for these communities?
You know, it's not inherently all bad. When the intentions are different, when the power dynamics are maybe a bit more balanced, global connections can be beneficial. It's not impossible.
Like how?
Well, think about online platforms. Amazon, Etsy, Alibaba. They can give tribal artisans direct access to global markets for their crafts. That can bring in real income, a sense of pride, help keep traditions alive.
Okay, that makes sense.
International organizations like UNESCO or the FAO sometimes fund projects, healthcare, schools, agricultural training that can help villages combat diseases, improve nutrition, adapt sustainably. You see athletes from indigenous backgrounds gaining global fame. Think Mary Kom from Manipur or Usain Bolt with his Jamaican roots. That brings visibility, inspiration back to their community.
Festivals too, right?
Yeah.
Like the Hornbill Festival in Nagaland.
Exactly. Drawing tourists, reviving cultural practices, boosting the local economy in a way that ideally the community controls. And in the U.S., you have the example of Native American tribes running casinos on reservation lands. It's controversial for some, but the profits are often plowed back into housing, healthcare, education, infrastructure, really improving lives and challenging old stereotypes.
And international law, does that play a role?
Increasingly, yes. Things like the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, or ILO conventions, give tribes a stronger legal footing, a platform to defend their land rights and cultural heritage on the world stage.
So it really boils down to the fact that globalization itself isn't inherently good or evil. It's more about the motives and the power dynamics involved, isn't it?
Precisely. Who is driving the interaction? Who benefits? Are Indigenous rights respected? Is there genuine partnership? When those conditions lean positive, global links can support communities, allowing them to adapt and thrive rather than just being steamrolled. It's about how it's managed.
Wow, what a deep dive, truly. We've really journeyed today, haven't we? From ancient islanders risking everything for shell necklaces that symbolize social bonds, all the way to modern indigenous communities grappling with the complexities, the dangers, but also maybe the opportunities of global markets. We've seen pretty clearly, I think, that economies are never just about stuff. They're about people, relationships, survival itself, all deeply, deeply embedded in the fabric of culture.
Absolutely. We've explored some of the profound wisdom embedded in these diverse economic forms. And we've seen how critical it is to understand different perspectives, whether it's that formalist lens of rational choice or the substantivist view of economies being embedded in social life. And maybe this leaves us with a final thought, a question for everyone listening. In our incredibly interconnected world today, how can we actually learn from this diversity? How can we draw on these different economic systems, these different ways of valuing things to perhaps build more equitable, more sustainable futures for everybody? And maybe on a personal level, what aspects of your own economic life, the things you buy, sell, give, receive, what parts are truly embedded in your social world, going beyond just the price tag?